So the New York Times has a piece out called "Biden has only bad options for bringing down oil prices." And this is what they write. This is written by Clifford Krauss at the New York Times. He writes, "When President Biden meets Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, he will be following in the footsteps of presidents like Jimmy Carter, who flew to Tehran in 1977 to exchange toasts with the Shah of Iran on New Year's Eve. Like the prince, the Shah was an unelected monarch with a tarnished human rights record. But Mr. Carter was obliged to celebrate with him for a cause that was of great concern to people back home: cheap gasoline and secure oil supplies. As Mr. Carter and other presidents learned, Mr. Biden has precious few tools to bring down costs at the pump, especially when Russia, one of the world's largest energy producers, has started an unprovoked war against a smaller neighbor." This is the first fallacy. There is much that Joe Biden can do to bring down gas prices. This narrative that you'll see here in this New York Times piece, this is one of the thesis of the piece. This is simply not correct. It's not correct because what the New York Times doesn't want to entertain is all of the options. What are all of the options? What are the actions that Joe Biden could take in order to bring down the price of gasoline for you and for me at the pump? They don't want to entertain all those options. And so what they do is they eliminate the options that would work, and they look at these various options that wouldn't really be effective, and then they make their claim, oh, there's not really much we could do, or these different options we have aren't effective. Well, sure, the options that you're considering aren't effective, but you're not even considering the options that are effective. So let's keep reading. During the 2020 campaign, Mr. Biden pledged to turn Saudi Arabia into a pariah for the assassination of a prominent dissident, Jamal Khashoggi. But officials said last week that he, Biden, plans to visit the kingdom this summer. It's just the latest sign that oil has again regained its centrality in geopolitics. Just a few years ago, the Times writes, many lawmakers in Washington and oil and gas executives in Texas were patting themselves on the back for an energy boom that had turned the United States into a net exporter of oil and petroleum products and made it more energy independent. With prices rising, that achievement now looks illusory. Okay, so what's really funny here is it just says many lawmakers in Washington. So why, but they don't mention President Trump by name here. They don't mention the person who caused the United States to be energy independent because they can't give President Trump any credit, even where credit is due here. But make no mistake, it was President Trump's deliberate political actions that led to the U.S. being energy independent because that was the purpose of his policies. And Biden, in his first months in office, reversed that. So this wasn't just arbitrary lawmakers in Washington or arbitrary oil and gas executives. This was the Trump administration that did that. The United States, the Times writes, is the world's biggest oil and natural gas producer, but it accounts for only about 12% of the global petroleum supply. The price of oil, the principal cost in gasoline, can still shoot up or tumble depending on events halfway around the world. And no president, no matter how powerful or competent, can do much to control it. Again, that's false, and we'll get to why in just a minute. The Times says those facts are cold comfort to Americans who are finding that a stop at the gas station can easily cost $100, much more than just a year earlier. When fuel prices rise, consumers demand action and can turn against presidents who seem unwilling or unable to bring them back down. Yes, we should. If a president is unwilling to do what it takes to bring down gasoline prices after the cost of gasoline on average has doubled in the past year, yeah, we should hold that president accountable at the ballot box. Even the New York Times understands this, and they don't understand a whole lot about reality. They write, always looking ahead to the next election when their jobs or their party's hold on power is at stake, presidents can find it impossible not to try to cajole or plead with foreign or domestic oil producers to drill and pump more oil faster. A president has to try, said Bill Richardson, an energy secretary in the Clinton administration. Unfortunately, there are only bad options, and any alternative options are probably worse than asking the Saudis to increase production. Two other oil-producing countries that could increase production, Iran and Venezuela, are U.S. adversaries that Western sanctions have largely cut out of the global market. Striking any deal with their leaders without securing major concessions on issues like nuclear enrichment and democratic reforms would be politically perilous for Mr. Biden. Isn't it pathetic that we've gotten to the point that as the world's superpower, we are forced to resort to begging other nations and hostile foreign nations like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Iran for oil because we have politically decided through the election of Democrats that we are not going to take care of ourselves. We are not going to utilize the resources that we have. We're not going to drill. We're not going to build pipelines. We are instead going to kowtow to the climate change agenda. Again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll get to that in a little bit here. They go on to say some Republican lawmakers and oil executives have argued that Mr. Biden could do more to increase domestic oil and gas production by opening up more federal lands and waters to oil drilling in places like Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. He could also ease regulations on pipeline construction so Canadian producers could send more oil south. But even those initiatives, which, the Times says, environmentalists and many Democrats oppose because they would retard efforts to combat climate change, would have little immediate impact because it takes months for new oil wells to start producing and pipelines can take years to build. So the other part of this is there's this effort right now by the left to demonize oil companies as if oil and gas companies simply don't, they have leases. They say we don't need Biden to approve new leases. These oil and gas companies have leases. They just aren't taking advantage of them. They're not building, they're not investing, they're not producing. And the answer to that is yes, that's true. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is there has to be stability in the market for any business in any industry to feel comfortable making a fiscal investment. If you are going to invest a significant amount of money, then you need to have a structure of stability so that you know that the rules that you used to calculate your business decision, whether it's in the interest of your company, in the interest of your profit, in the interest of your shareholders, is going to come to fruition if you play by the rules that are set versus what's happening now, where these oil and gas companies say, okay, well, I have these federal leases, but it would cost me millions, if not billions of dollars of investment to take advantage of them. And how do I know that Joe Biden's not going to fulfill what he threatened on the campaign trail, which is to completely illegalize what I just invested in? So why would they? Why would they take advantage of these leases if they're unsure of the stability of the structure that would allow them to take action after they've already fronted the cash to do so? It would be an absolutely unreasonable thing to ask of them, to ask of any business. This is true, by the way, of the stock market. This is why the stock market always plummets after a natural disaster, because the stability of the situation has changed. People can't count on the supply and the demand and the consumers and the rules and the regulations and the government and the people. There's upheaval in the market. And markets require stability for people to have confidence in the market enough to make an investment, especially a humongous financial investment like what would be required in order to utilize these federal leases. And this is something that's not talked about often when it comes to utilizing or taking advantage of the natural resources here in the United States. There needs to be some long-term stability in this market, not this flip-flopping between Democrat administration and Republican administration, where the rules of the game change so significantly that a business, if one of these oil companies decided to start taking advantage of a lease under Trump, and then all of a sudden they were choked out of it by the Biden administration, and maybe the next administration's a Republican one, and he says, go ahead and start up again, that's never gonna work. There has to be long-term stability in these rules and regulations in order for this ever to be an effective way of addressing this problem. But again, this is up to the Democrats. This is a deliberate political choice of Joe Biden, understanding how markets work, understanding what it means to take this significant of an investment. He has to provide the stability. Otherwise, his political action is directly responsible for the gas prices being so high because the supply is low and the demand remains the same.